Hello, welcome to the Comic Book Commentary. I'm Bo Leidig, and this week, as I promised last week, we're going to be taking a look at the Spawn WildC.A.T.S crossover miniseries Devil Day #1. So let's zoom in and take a closer look. First published in January of 1996, we see here on the cover, most prominently featured is Spawn right in the middle, and then most, but not all of the Wildcats team. I say most because this character is in fact not Zealot. This is New Zealot. You can tell by the fact that she is a black woman and also wears a mask, despite the fact that her costume is very reminiscent of Zealot's. The odd part about this is that old original Zealot also appears in this miniseries, but is not featured on the cover whatsoever. I don't know if this was just an oversight. Also, I don't know how well this is coming across in the video. It really feels as though this was a completely photoshopped together cover. There's just something about the way that these characters are placed and how the foreground and backgrounds work that just seems ever so slightly off to me. I can't put my finger on it, but it really does seem as though these characters were drawn independently of one another and then all put together on this single image to create this cover. I could be wrong. I could be entirely wrong. But that's really what it looks like to my eye, and I can't shake the feeling that that's what happened in this instance. We start off with an advertisement for Wildstorm Archives Series 2 Chromium Trading Cards. I do not own any of these cards, nor am I interested in owning any of these cards. It's been my experience that while Chromium can be cool when it's used sparingly for a comic book cover, it tends to fall really flat when you shrink it down to trading card size. It just loses so much detail in the artwork that while it is, shiny and, eye-catching, it just doesn't seem to really hit the mark in terms of conveying the artwork that's on the card. These are just my opinions, of course. You may have a different opinion, but I just really do not appreciate Chromium when it's used in a trading card format. Getting into the story, we are shown a mostly black set of panels that are made to represent a place that exists outside of space and time, some sort of, for lack of a better term, eternity type of realm in which nothing exists because of magic. Now, this doesn't seem to make a whole lot of sense, and that's because this is Alan Moore, who, by the way, is the writer for this miniseries. However, the credits are not displayed until the final page of the book, so that's when I'm going to read them. But this is Alan Moore's best attempt at trying to come up with a logical reason as to why this story could take place the way that it does. Honestly, I don't feel like it works all that well. I get what he was going for, but it just kind of falls flat in my opinion. Basically, in this eternity realm, quote unquote, there are beings who exist that last forever as time has no existence in this place. And they can just kind of do whatever they like as they are all magicians and magic is the only thing that exists within this realm, is how it's explained. It doesn't go too much deeper than that, and the exposition that we get past that feels like it's just kind of Alan Moore giving us a word salad to try and cover for the fact that it was his best option at giving an explanation. I don't know. It's how everything starts, and we're going to have to try and get through it together. We are then given a 2-page splash that depicts all of these magicians that exist within this void. They're not all given names in the beginning of this book. This one here with the 3 eyes and the giant mouth and the robe is known as Chiming Fire. This one down here is the Lady Cube. There's another one called Iowas, but it's not terribly well explained which one of them that is. We can see there's also, this guy over here with a giant head that has 2 tiny little legs coming off of it. This large nude woman and a small little guy that sits on her shoulder. And it's not explained exactly which one of them is Iowas or what the other two are named. Again, the beginning of this story is really just kind of hey, this is the best I could come up with type of thing as to explaining why this happened. So the short version is that these magicians apparently all get bored and decide to not only change themselves and their appearance frequently, their names are also not set in stone, and then they also come up with ways to just amuse themselves and pass eternity. One of the ways that this is being done currently is that Chiming Fire has created this amulet that he holds up to everyone. Initially, they're not really impressed and they are skeptical, but then he dips the amulet into a pool of space-time, which begins a set of events that starts the story that we're about to read in motion. We are then teleported to the Halo building, where we see that Voodoo is screaming, having just witnessed the events that took place in the void between space and time in a psychic vision. She then calms down, and the rest of the team comes to her aid, asking what happened. She explains the vision and tells them that she saw a large creature dipping an amulet into a pool, and while she doesn't necessarily understand what the vision means, she is definitely worried about the overwhelming feeling of dread that came along with it. However, she does explain to the team that her visions don't always play out exactly the way that she interprets them, and that this, in fact, may be a case of her just not really understanding the context of what she just saw. However, the rest of the team is still worried by this, as they know that her visions are oftentimes a precursor to something, and they're hoping that that something isn't bad for them. We then get an advertisement for Backlash vs. Stormwatch in Backlash issues number 17 and 18. I should point out that as of recording this video, I have not made it to the point in the Stormwatch story where Backlash breaks off into his own solo series. I'm very close to it, but I'm not there yet. However, if you'd like to know more about Stormwatch and the origins of Backlash, you can check out my Stormwatch playlist. We then see a very reminiscent of 1996 advertisement for Wildstorm screensavers. These were CD-ROMs that you had to call a 1-800 number to order. There were 3 CD-ROMs, one for Gen 13, one for Wildcats, and one for Wildstorm Productions. I do find it funny that in the advertisement they bring up that leaving your screen on with no screensaver can damage your display, which is absolutely true. However, they fail to mention that your operating system already has multiple free screensavers that it comes with pre-installed, and that there's absolutely no actual reason to purchase any of these CD-ROMs. Also, the price. They are $19.95 a piece, or if you wanted to buy the set of all 3, it was $52.95. To put it in perspective, that's something like $125, $130 in today's money for 3 CD-ROMs. Jim Lee, you greedy bastard. Getting back to the story, we see that Zealot is trying to comfort Voodoo as she's still noticeably upset, and Voodoo explains that the part of her vision that made her the most fearful was that there was a very foreboding feeling that came with all of the vision that she had that suggested that the Wildcats team was in great danger, but most importantly, she was not present in the vision whatsoever, which leads her to believe that she may have been dead in said vision. We then see on the outside of the building a very familiar looking hand clenching into the concrete as it scales said building. And back inside, we see that Zealot continues to try and comfort Voodoo as she begins to sob a bit. And Grifter asks Warblade what he feels about the whole thing, and if he thinks that there's any merit to this vision, or it's just her powers giving her some sort of false warning. However, Warblade responds by stating that he's had a rather uneasy feeling for some time now as well, and he believes that this is some sort of a calm before an incoming storm, as we see the roof of the building and a skylight with a familiar-looking foot standing next to it. We then see Spawn jump through the skylight and immediately attack the Wildcats, demanding to know where Zealot and Grifter are, As he begins his assault by punching Spartan across the face, the Wildcats are caught completely off guard, as Maul even states, "Hey, I recognize this Spawn guy. I saw him in the papers. Isn't he supposed to be some sort of vampire?" This, of course, is in reference to the Spawn Blood Feud miniseries, which, by the way, you can watch all my episodes on the Spawn Blood Feud miniseries in my Spawn miniseries playlist. Marlowe then comes into the room demanding answers as Voodoo explains that this guy just burst in and started attacking them, screaming that he was looking for Zealot and Grifter, as we see Maul grab Spawn, trying to contain him while the rest of the team can get their bearings. We then get this really cool 2-page action sequence where the background image is actually just a still shot. However, we see Spawn moving from panel to panel, trying to illustrate his movement through the room. He frees himself from Maul's grasps and immediately makes his way through all of the Wildcats team. Grifter even stating that he can't get a clear shot on Spawn and yelling at Spartan for not doing a better job at leading the team. However, Spartan tells him that he's doing his best and immediately commands Zealot to get away from the creature, as Spawn grabs Zealot by the throat and immediately tells her that he's going to make her pay for what she did. However, Spawn then freezes as he looks Zealot in the face and realizes that something is very strange here, as he asks her, "Hey, didn't you used to be black?" He then turns around and gets a good look at Grifter and also notices something different about him as he states, "Yeah, why don't you have a full head of white hair?" He then stops and stands up, apologizing to all of the Wildcats as he tells them that something very wrong has happened, as these are not the same two people that attacked him in the alleyways the previous night, and he believes he may have made a grave mistake. Marlowe tells him that he wants to hear exactly what all transpired the night before in Spawn's alleys, and he tells him that they all need to sit down like gentlemen and hash this out. We then get an advertisement for DEF CON 4. I only have a few random ass issues of DEF CON 4 as I'm recording this video, and I'm trying to get more of the issues in sequence so that I can actually start making videos about DEF CON 4 in the future. And stay tuned, because when I get those issues, I will begin making videos about DEF CON 4. We then see an advertisement for the Gen 13 Ordinary Heroes miniseries, which I do not have any videos on my channel about as of yet. However, if you'd like to know more about the early days of Gen 13, including the Gen 13 miniseries and Gen 13 number 0, you can check out my Gen 13 playlist. Back to the story, Marlowe starts to try and figure out everything that's been going on as he tells Spawn, "So you imagined that somebody that was Grifter and Zealot attacked you?" And Spawn responds by stating, "No, I didn't imagine anything. Two people calling themselves Grifter and Zealot attacked me, and they fought exactly like you two did." However, Zealot takes this as an insult and actually believes that Spawn is lying, as she states that no one could have possibly mastered the Coda martial techniques to the level of her and Grifter without her knowledge. This jogs something in Spawn's memory as he says, "Oh yeah, I've heard of the Coda before. I always thought you were just some kind of weird urban legend or fairy tale, but it makes no difference. The woman who fought me in the alleyways last night fought exactly the same as you, except she was black." We then get 2 pages of flashback sequence where Spawn explains the happenings of the previous night. How he was minding his own business in his alleys when suddenly there was a loud bang and a flash of light, and 2 people claiming to be Zealot and Grifter appeared in front of him. They immediately attacked him, catching him off guard, and got the better of him to the point where Zealot was planning on basically splitting Spawn's head open with one of her swords. Spawn tells them that he actually wasn't sure if he would have survived having his brain kebabbed. However, before any of this took place, Zealot suddenly collapsed and stopped her attack. Grifter comforted her, and despite the fact that he still wanted to carry out the plan, he was too old and too slow to take on Spawn by himself, so he and Zealot turned and made a quick retreat into the night. Afterwards, Spawn used some old CIA contacts to track down the headquarters of the Wildcats so that he could pay them a little visit and settle the score. Also, I'd like to point out that I really do like the way that they did the page layouts for these 2 pages of flashbacks, with Spawn's head being, the border on either side of the panels. I know it's very cliche and it's nothing new, but it was done really well, and I think it looks fantastic. Props to Scott Clark, who, by the way, is the artist for this entire series, and doesn't get named until the credits on the very last page of the book, so we'll get to it then. Marlowe then tells Spawn that he may be in the right place after all, as if there are 2 people going around impersonating Wildcats, he wants to know why, and he wants to aid Spawn in figuring out what happened. However, Zealot still believes that Spawn is lying, as she claims there is no Black Coda that fights like her, and that he's made up this entire story. Spawn, however, rebuttals this by stating that everything he's told her is true, and that she and this other Zealot have a lot in common, including their bad attitudes. Marlowe then tries to dig a little deeper in figuring out what exactly is going on, as he states there's one part of this that he can't put together, and that's if there are 2 people who are trying to impersonate both Zealot and Grifter, why would they do such a lousy job of it? Why would they pick a black woman? Why would they pick an old man instead of trying to actually find people that looked and resembled the real Zealot and Grifter? At this point, however, the doors to the room they're in open suddenly, and they're interrupted by 2 new people, one of which whom says, "That's because we're not imitations, we're just from a lousy place," as Marlowe demands to know who these people are and how they got in. We then see an advertisement for the Wildstorm collectible card game. I have never seen these cards ever in real life. I know of their existence through advertisements, and I've never met anyone who actually played this collectible card game. This, of course, would have been right around the time that Magic the Gathering was starting to really pick up some steam, and I'm trying to think, 96, would Pokemon have been making waves in the US as of yet? I don't believe so. Either way, the collectible card game craze was in its early stages in 1996, and a lot of different companies were trying to cash in. Obviously, this one didn't go anywhere long term, though I am interested if there's anyone watching this who ever had these cards and played the game. What was your experience with it? Was it any good? Did you enjoy yourselves? Or was it just sort of a, hey, this is our version of Magic the Gathering with our characters, check it out, please, we want more money? The unannounced guests are in fact none other than the old Grifter and the new Zealot. This old Grifter explains that while his key card is rusty and battered, it still opens up the doors to the old Halo building, and that he is in fact the real Cole Cash, but this is the new Zealot. The new Zealot is rather impressed by seeing the Halo building in what she describes as one piece. Meanwhile, the old Zealot and the young Grifter are both rather shocked by these 2 people who have arrived, as they both can't believe that this other man is also Grifter. However, Spawn narrows his eyes as he states, "I know exactly who these people are," as he exclaims they're the 2 that attacked him in the alleyway the night before, and that he's ready to settle the score with them. However, he's held back by both Warblade and Spartan, and the old Grifter tells him there's no need to fight, that they've abandoned their previous plan. And the new Zealot also states that they would also never fight in the Halo building, as this is kind of holy ground for them. Old Grifter then goes up and touches young Grifter, which technically should be not possible given that this is a time travel story, but sure, whatever. And tells him that this place is bringing back all kinds of memories, like when this coat was brand new. The new Zealot grabs the old Zealot and tells her, "I can't believe how beautiful you were when you were young." Old Grifter then turns around and sees his former teammates, Warblade, Maul, and Voodoo, and exclaims, "Man, they're all still here. This is bringing back so many memories. This is so emotional for me. Maybe Tapestry was right and I shouldn't have made the time jump with you." But the new Zealot tells him that that's crazy to think that way and that he's exactly where he should be. Spawn is still rather outraged and once again tries to lunge forward. However, Marlowe holds him back and states, "I want to know exactly who you are." At this point, the older grifter removes his mask and states, "Is this enough proof for you that we are who we say we are?" And Marlowe is stunned at seeing the elderly grifter standing in front of him. Zealot exclaims, "Look, brother grifter, that is in fact you." And grifter is also rather shocked by what he's seeing. However, Marlowe is still hesitant to believe him as he states, "I'm going to need something more than a chance resemblance to buy this story." However, the new zealot exclaims, "You haven't heard our story yet. We're here to prevent something very bad that's about to happen very close in your future." She then starts to explain what has happened in what is the past for them, that in about a month from this moment that they're standing in currently, a minor demon is going to find a means by which he can free himself from the chains of his master. Using a magical talisman, he defeats the king of hell and takes his throne, gaining all of his powers. He then declares himself the, I'm going to try my best to pronounce this, CLXXXIX, a powerful sorcerer who is now the ruler over hell, and he also declares that America should be his new kingdom. He then decides in September of 1996 to unleash hell on Earth and allow the demons to run wild on New York City, as they immediately start to cause all sorts of destruction and death and chaos as they begin to take over the city and make it the new kingdom for their master. The new zealot then goes on to explain that humanity was immediately overwhelmed by the forces of hell. Even the superhumans, the savage dragon was immediately killed. All of Stormwatch and Wetworks were taken into custody and put into prison camps. The Youngblood teams are in hiding with no evidence that they're trying to mount a counteroffensive. And we can see here that this possibly is supposed to be a depiction of Supreme being crucified. We see Dragon's head on a stake. We also see Union and what appears to be Pit and possibly Deadlock being led down into a pit going underground. And at some point, the Wildcats, who were one of the few superhero teams that were still trying to resist the forces of hell, were being completely overwhelmed to the point that their leader decided that the only logical conclusion for them to try and stop all of this was to send a few members back to kill the CLXXXIX before any of this transpired. The new zealot was chosen because she was the youngest team member, and Grifter actually just volunteered, mostly because he wanted to see old familiar faces. However, the new zealot does explain that most of these people she never met. Spawn, however, is confused by this whole story as he wonders how any of this had to do with him being attacked. However, the new zealot states, "Don't you understand? You're the CLXXXIX. You're the one who will destroy the world, and in about a month, you're going to find this talisman that will lead you on this horrible path." Spawn then clutches his head and states, "I don't understand. I can't believe I would do something like this." However, at this point, Marlowe interjects and asks, "Wait a minute. If this is all what's going to transpire, then explain to me why you didn't take this guy out when you had the opportunity." The new zealot goes on to explain that she couldn't bring herself to kill someone who had yet to actually do anything wrong. Also, apparently we're just overlooking the fact that this isn't really how time travel works. The moment that she and Grifter went back in time, it would have created an alternate timeline that the two of them would have existed in, and that there's nothing they could do in the past that would have prevented their reality and timeline from ever existing. So that hell world is a permanent fixture in the timeline that they came from. But I guess we're just not going to operate on that system of logic for this story. It's fine, whatever. At this point, Grifter states that they've decided that the best option for them is to take reinforcements with them back to the future so that they can fight the CLXXXIX on their terms. The younger Grifter and Zealot both volunteer and state that they're willing to do so, and Spawn states that he's also willing to help, given that if he's the one who, I guess, caused all of this, it's definitely his responsibility to try and clean up this mess. Marlowe asks Void if she can take all of them back to the future, and she responds that this is well within her powers. He then bids them all adieu and tells the new zealot to tell his future self that he hopes that he does a great job. However, the New Zealot states that it's probably not going to be possible for her to have any contact with future Marlowe. Marlowe tries to question this, however, before he can get an answer, Void uses her powers to suddenly make the entirety of the team vanish as she takes them all to the future. We then get a newsletter section for upcoming Wildstorm events. It notably talks about the Spawn WildC.A.T.S team up, which is kind of funny given that we're reading it currently. It also brings up Black Ops and Strike Back, which I have literally 0 issues of either of these comics, so I'm just going to keep an eye out for them and hopefully run into them when I'm digging through dollar boxes at some point. And more notably, Team 7. And if you'd like to know more about Team 7, you can check out my Team 7 miniseries. It's a really cool miniseries that explains the backstories for many of the characters that litter throughout the Wildstorm universe and how they got to where they are in the current quote unquote mid-90s and how all of their stories started out in the late 70s. We then get a really nice looking 1.5 page splash as we see Void teleporting the entirety of the team through time. But she does make note that the time stream seems to be in flux and chaos and that there's some sort of terrible disturbance that she can't figure out. They then land in the future that they're trying to prevent. And as we see New Zealot trying to get to her feet and regain her bearings, she states that they've got to move and that they're not safe here in the Halo building. Young Grifter exclaims, "Wait a minute, this is the Halo building?" And New Zealot states, yes, it was destroyed in the Siege of 05. And now in the year 2015, we've got to keep our heads down and do our best to make our way across the city to our new base. Keep in mind, this story is now taking place in the hellscape future of 2015. They open the doors to go out onto the streets, and suddenly they're hit with a horrible smell. And Spawn even exclaims, "Oh, merciful God." However, Old Grifter exclaims, "No, I'm afraid not. Not here, my friend." We then get a 2-page splash where Old Grifter exclaims, "No God in this neighborhood, I'm afraid," as we see them looking down the street to see that there's a large Spawn banner, some fires, a few demons flying around, bodies strung up, monsters on the sides of buildings, and a couple of skyscrapers that seem to be collapsing onto each other. And honestly, I don't really think that this is as bad as it should look. I mean, this is supposed to literally be hell on earth. And honestly, it just looks like regular New York City with a few fires going, some buildings that are falling down, and a couple of random monsters flying around and clinging to the side of buildings. There should be way more like fire and brimstone and just complete horror show going on, in my opinion, if this is supposed to represent literal hell on earth. But then again, this was the artistic choice they went with, and this is what we have, no matter how lackluster, in my opinion, it might seem to be. And here on the final page of the book, we actually get to the credits. Writer, Alan Moore. Penciler, Scott Clark. Inker, Sal Regla? Perhaps? I'm sorry, I've got to be saying that wrong. Letterer, Tom Orzechowski. Colorist, Leanne Clark. And on the reverse inside cover, we get an advertisement for Wildstorm's Conflict, which, as far as I can tell, was an expansion card set that went along with the Wildstorm trading card game. And this one seems to heavily focus on the women of Wildstorm in its expansion, though I'd assume many of these characters probably already had cards within the base set of the Wildstorm card game. I'm just guessing. Again, I've never had any experience with this card game. Though I do like that they got an actual model to dress up and pose to be Voodoo for one of the cards. She looks kind of like Voodoo, but also I need to point out, man, they really did not know how to make a good-looking superhero costume back in the 90s. It was literally just, we'll just throw some spandex together and give you some boots. Like, it wasn't custom fitted to anybody. Like, they didn't understand how to utilize fabrics and plastics together to give the illusion of some sort of protective clothing like we saw by the time the early 2000s and current day rolled around. This really just looks like, kind of above average cosplay, not even high level, just like slightly above average that you'd see at any Comic-Con nowadays. And that was the Spawn WildC.A.T.S Devil Day miniseries issue number 1. And it's a comic book, folks. Personally, I'm not a huge fan of this miniseries. It's okay. Like I said, the explanation that Alan Moore tries to create for how this story even takes place and makes sense is kind of reaching, in my opinion. It really reeks of what you see happen a lot in both Marvel and DC, where they want to create a storyline that involves the entirety of their universe. So they just have to create some new cosmic being or alien creature that no one's ever heard of before, but is somehow the most powerful thing that's ever existed, and therefore requires the teamwork of the entirety of their universe to try and fight against it. It's sort of in that same vein. And honestly, I don't know. It just feels like it's kind of reaching in a lot of ways. Also, like I said, the stuff where the time travel parts of the story don't really make a whole lot of sense unless you're just willing to ignore basic premises of time travel and realities that would exist with it. But, they were trying to go for a story, and Alan Moore was kind of tasked with coming up with something to go along with this. Personally, I don't feel like he really hit the mark as well as he could have. But then again, this isn't the easiest type of story to try and write for. But then again, these are just my opinions. Your opinions may be that this story premise seems really cool and the explanation makes perfect sense, and that you weren't bothered at all by the lack of basically observing the most, fundamental rules of time travel. And if that's the case, it's okay, because everyone's entitled to their own opinions. If you enjoyed today's video, please feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. And thanks for stopping by. Have a great day.